The sun peeked through the tall glass windows of the grand mansion on the hill, casting golden light across the marble floors. It was the kind of house people only saw in magazines. Chandeliers that sparkled like stars, walls painted with art worth more than most people's entire homes, and cars parked neatly outside that could buy a small neighborhood. But behind all that shine and wealth lived a boy who had everything, yet somehow felt empty inside. He was 17, tall for his age, with messy hair and eyes that often looked tired even after sleeping in until noon. Everyone in the house called him the young master. He had the best of everything: private tutors, designer clothes, and a father whose success story was printed in newspapers. But none of that seemed to make him happy. In fact, most days he woke up already bored. School had always been a struggle. No matter how many tutors came and went, he failed nearly every subject. His report cards were a constant reminder of how little he cared. The truth was, he never tried. He didn't see the point. To him, life was already taken care of. Food, money, comfort, everything was guaranteed. So why bother with tests or homework? His father, a man always dressed in suits and always on the phone, didn't understand him. They rarely spoke except during breakfast, where silence filled the long dining table. The father would read the newspaper while sipping black coffee, and the son would scroll through his phone, pretending not to notice the disappointment in his father's eyes. "Another failed exam," his father would say, his tone calm but cold. "At this rate, you'll embarrass yourself before you ever step into the real world." The boy never answered. He would shrug, grab his juice, and leave the table before the conversation could go further. It wasn't that he didn't care, deep down he did. But he didn't know how to fix himself. He didn't know what was missing. The staff in the mansion treated him with quiet respect. The chef greeted him politely every morning, the driver waited patiently whenever he was late, and the housekeepers whispered to each other about how lazy he was. Everyone knew his reputation, the spoiled son of a billionaire who had no sense of direction. One Monday morning, something changed. The old maid who had worked there for years had retired, and a new face appeared in the kitchen. She was in her mid-40s, tall, with warm brown skin and kind eyes that held both strength and gentleness. She moved quietly, but there was something about her presence that made the house feel different, calmer, maybe even alive again. She introduced herself simply, with a soft smile. She didn't look nervous despite standing in one of the biggest houses in the city. She greeted everyone the same: the chef, the gardener, even the young master who barely looked up from his phone when she said good morning. At first, he didn't care who she was. She was just another worker hired to clean and keep things in order. But over the next few days, he began noticing her. She was always on time, always focused, and never seemed to rest. Early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, she was already sweeping the floors or folding laundry. Late at night, when he came downstairs for snacks, she was still there, quietly finishing her work. She never complained, never sighed, and always greeted him with that same gentle tone. "Good evening, young master," she'd say, even if it was past midnight. He often ignored her or gave a half-hearted nod. But what caught his attention was how she treated everyone equally: the gardener, the driver, even the cook who often got frustrated and raised his voice. She never reacted with anger. Instead, she would smile and carry on. One morning, when he was late for school again, his father scolded him harshly in front of the staff. "Do you even care about your future?" His father shouted. "You're wasting everything I've built for you." The boy stood there in silence, staring at the floor. The moment his father left for work, he stormed into the kitchen, angry and embarrassed. He opened the fridge, slammed it shut, and muttered under his breath. The new maid was cleaning nearby, quietly watching him. After a moment, she said softly, "You know, being angry doesn't change what's already happened." He looked at her sharply. "What do you know about it?" he said. "You wouldn't understand." She didn't get offended. Instead, she kept wiping the counter and said, "Maybe not. But I do know that no one learns to walk by never falling." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly. "It means failing is not the problem. Staying down is," he didn't reply. He just grabbed a drink and walked away. But her words lingered in his head longer than he expected. He wasn't used to anyone talking to him that way. Not with judgment, but with quiet truth. Over the next few days, he found himself watching her more closely. How she worked without complaining. How she smiled even when tired. how she treated everyone with the same respect regardless of who they were. He couldn't understand it. She had so little compared to him, yet she seemed more peaceful, more whole. One afternoon, as he sat in the living room pretending to study, he heard her humming softly from the hallway. The tune was gentle, almost like a lullaby. Without realizing it, he listened, feeling oddly calm. When she noticed him, she stopped, a little embarrassed. "Sorry," she said. "Old habits. I hum when I'm working." "It's fine," he replied quietly. "What song is that?" "Just something my mother used to sing," she said. "It helps me focus." He nodded, unsure what else to say. For the first time, he realized she had a life outside this mansion. Memories, stories, people she loved. He had never thought about the staff that way before. They were just workers. But now, he saw her as a person, someone strong, steady, and strangely inspiring. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, his attitude began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change. He still failed a few tests, still skipped some assignments, but he started trying just a little. He stayed up one night reading instead of scrolling through social media. He asked a teacher for help after class. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. His father didn't notice at first, but the maid did. She saw the open books on his desk, the notes scribbled in messy handwriting. One morning, she placed a small plate of fruit beside him while he studied and said, "You know, the hardest part isn't starting. It's continuing when it feels like nothing's changing." He smiled weakly. "Yes, I'm learning that." "Good," she said with a nod. "Keep learning. Not just for your father, for yourself." That was the first time in years someone had told him to do something for himself, not for the sake of reputation or family pride. It made him think differently. Maybe that was what he'd been missing all along. Not motivation, but meaning. Still, he wasn't used to failing and trying again. Some days he wanted to quit, but every time he passed by her working silently, he remembered that lesson. That failure only mattered if you gave up. One evening, his father returned home early and found him at his desk, actually studying. He didn't say much, just looked surprised and walked away. The boy felt a small spark of pride, the kind that came from effort, not wealth. Later that night, he found the maid in the kitchen, closing up for the day. He hesitated, then said quietly, "Hey." "Thanks," she turned, puzzled. "For what? For—" "I don't know," he said awkwardly. "For talking to me that day. I think I needed to hear it." She smiled warmly. "Sometimes we all need someone to remind us who we can be." He nodded, not sure how to respond, and walked back upstairs. But inside something felt different. For the first time, he wanted to do better. Not to impress his father. Not to prove anyone wrong, but because he didn't want to disappoint himself. As the night deepened and the house grew silent, he sat by his window, staring at the city lights below. He realized that the world outside those mansion walls was full of people working hard for every meal, every dream, every little victory. And here he was, with everything handed to him, yet feeling empty. Maybe the maid was right. Maybe falling wasn't the problem. Maybe he just needed to learn how to stand, and in that quiet moment he promised himself one thing, that the next test he faced, in school or in life, he would at least try. Because for the first time in his life he finally wanted to. The days after that quiet promise felt different. The boy woke up earlier than usual, not by much, but enough to see the morning light creeping across his room. He opened his books again, reread the lessons he'd ignored for months, and tried to understand the things that once frustrated him. The work was hard. His mind drifted easily, but each time he wanted to quit, he remembered her words. Failing isn't the problem. Staying down is. Still, the mansion remained the same. Silent hallways, polished marble floors, and a father too busy to notice the small changes taking place. The boy didn't mind. For once, he wasn't doing it for anyone else. One morning, as he sat at the breakfast table with a textbook open beside his plate, the new maid entered carrying a tray. She placed it gently on the table and looked surprised to see him reading. "You're up early today," she said with a small smile. He nodded, flipping through the pages. "Trying to understand something I should have learned months ago." She chuckled softly. "That's how most things start. You look at them too late, but at least you look." He smiled a little. "I guess." She poured him a glass of juice, then said, "When I was your age, I used to study by candlelight. No electricity at home. I'd fall asleep with my books on my lap. My mother would wake me up and say, "You can rest when you've done your best." He looked up, curious. "Did it work?" "It did," she said, wiping the counter. "I wasn't the smartest in class, but I didn't quit. And that counts for more than people think." He nodded again, thinking about her words. He didn't know why, but her stories made him feel grounded. Like life wasn't about being perfect, but about trying, even when things were hard. Later that week, he had another test. He studied late into the night, his room lit only by a small desk lamp. For the first time in years, he felt nervous, not because of the grade, but because he truly wanted to do well. When he handed in his paper the next day, he walked out of class feeling something new, hope. But when the results came back, the number beside his name still wasn't good. He hadn't failed completely, but it wasn't enough to celebrate. He felt a sting of disappointment. That afternoon, he came home and sat quietly at the kitchen counter, watching the maid wash dishes. She noticed his silence. "Tough day?" she asked. He sighed. "Yeah, I studied hard this time and it still wasn't enough." She dried her hands and looked at him. "Did you do better than before?" "A little," he admitted. "Then it was enough," she said calmly. "You don't climb a mountain in one step." He stared at her, unsure what to say. She wasn't telling him what he wanted to hear. She was telling him what he needed to. He laughed softly. "You always have an answer for everything, don't you?" "Not everything," she said with a grin. "Just the things I've lived through." That night, he thought about what she'd said. Maybe improvement wasn't about big leaps. Maybe it was about moving 1 inch forward when it would be easier to stop. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm. He studied, failed a little, improved a little, and tried again. Slowly, his teachers began to notice the effort. One of them called his father to say, "Your son's attitude has changed. He's actually trying." His father didn't believe it at first. "My son, are you sure?" he asked, half joking. But deep down, he felt something stir. Maybe pride, maybe confusion. The boy didn't know about the call. He just kept going. And all the while, the maid continued her quiet work around the house, always encouraging him in her own way. Sometimes, when she saw him yawning at the table over his books, she'd say, "Rest your mind for a minute. You can't pour from an empty cup." Other times, she'd hand him a small snack, saying, "Fuel for the brain." It became their silent routine. She worked. He studied, and somehow their paths always crossed in small, meaningful ways. One afternoon, he came home early and found her outside, hanging clothes on the line. The sun was warm and a soft breeze moved through the garden. He watched her for a moment before saying, "Do you ever get tired of doing the same work every day?" She smiled without turning. "Of course. But tired doesn't mean ungrateful." He frowned a little. "I don't think I'd survive a week doing what you do." "You would," she said, finally facing him. "If you had to." He looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the laundry basket beside her. "When life gives you no other choice, you learn to do what needs to be done. Comfort can make people forget that." He was quiet for a while, then said softly, "I guess I've been too comfortable." She gave him a gentle nod. "That's not your fault. But now that you see it, you can choose to change it." He didn't say anything more, but those words sat with him for days. One morning, when his father was leaving for a business trip, he stopped by his son's room. For the first time in months, he saw him sitting at his desk, papers scattered everywhere. His father raised an eyebrow. "You're studying on your own?" The boy nodded without looking up. "Yeah." His father hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm proud of that." It was only 4 words, but they meant everything. After he left, the boy sat back in his chair, stunned. It wasn't much, but it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Later that day, he went to the kitchen and told the maid, "My father said he's proud of me." She looked genuinely happy. "See? Effort always shows up sooner or later." He grinned. "I guess you were right." "I usually am," she teased lightly, and they both laughed. Weeks later, another test came. This time, he didn't panic. He prepared carefully, slept well, and went into class with quiet confidence. When the results were announced, he had finally passed, not with the highest score, but high enough to surprise everyone, including himself. That evening, he came home smiling. The maid noticed it immediately. "Something good happened," she said knowingly. He nodded proudly. "I passed." "For real this time," she beamed, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful." "So what did you learn?" He paused, thinking. That maybe hard work isn't as bad as I thought. She laughed. It never is once you see the results. That night, as he sat in his room, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. For once, the silence in the mansion didn't bother him. He didn't need noise or distractions. He had purpose. But just as everything seemed to be going well, life decided to test him in another way. The next week, the maid didn't show up for work. The staff said she called to say she was sick and needed to rest for a few days. The house felt strangely empty without her steady presence. The boy realized how much her quiet encouragement had filled his days. He checked the kitchen every morning, half expecting to hear her humming or see her folding towels. But she wasn't there. The silence felt heavier now, not peaceful. He asked the cook if she'd heard anything. Just that she's taking care of something back home, the cook said. Didn't give many details. Days turned into a week. The boy continued studying, but it felt different. He missed her words, simple, wise, and always exactly what he needed. Then one afternoon she finally returned. He saw her walking through the gate, a little tired but smiling. He hurried down the stairs, almost running into the kitchen. "You're back," he said, relief in his voice. She nodded. "I had to take care of my daughter. She was unwell, but she's better now." "I'm glad she's okay," he said softly. She smiled. "Thank you." Then she looked at him closely. "You've been studying even without me reminding you?" He nodded proudly. "I told you I'm learning." She laughed quietly. "Then my job here is easier now." That evening he went to his room and opened his latest test paper again. He looked at the passing score printed at the top, then at the small note written by his teacher. "Good progress, keep going." He smiled and thought of what the maid had said on her first day, that no one learns to walk by never falling. He realized she had never just been a maid. She was a teacher too, not of books but of life. And her lessons were the ones he would remember far longer than anything in his textbooks. As he switched off his lamp that night, he whispered to himself, "I won't stay down again." And for the first time, he truly meant it. The next few months brought quiet changes no one had expected. The boy was no longer the same person who slept past noon and blamed everyone for his failures. He still had moments of laziness, but something inside him had shifted. He wanted to do better, not just in school, but in how he lived. He began helping out in small ways around the house. At first it was simple things, carrying his own dishes to the sink, picking up books from the floor, or cleaning his study desk. It wasn't much, but for someone who had never lifted a finger, it was a big start. The maid noticed, of course. She didn't make a big deal out of it. She just smiled quietly whenever she saw him doing something new. One morning, as he tried to fix a loose drawer handle in his room, she walked by and said, "Looks like someone's becoming handy." He grinned. "Well, I figured it's easier to fix it than wait for someone else to do it." She nodded approvingly. That's how it begins. You learn the small things first, then the big things don't seem so hard anymore. That idea stayed in his mind, learning through small things. It made him look at life differently. Instead of waiting for motivation or success to appear out of nowhere, he started focusing on what he could do that day. Some evenings, when his mind felt tired from studying, he would go to the kitchen and watch the maid work. She was never still for long, chopping vegetables, stirring soup, cleaning counters, always with quiet rhythm. Sometimes she'd hum that same soft tune he had heard the first week she arrived. It gave him a sense of calm he couldn't explain. One evening he asked her, "Don't you ever get tired of doing this every single day?" She smiled while washing dishes. "Of course I do. But it's not about the work. It's about how I see it. Every meal I cook, every floor I clean, it means someone's life runs smoother. That makes it worth it." He thought about that long after she went to bed. The idea that something so ordinary could mean something bigger fascinated him. Maybe life wasn't about big achievements after all. Maybe it was about doing the small things right, with care. The next day, when she was folding laundry in the living room, he sat beside her. "Can I help?" he asked. She looked surprised but nodded. Of course. She showed him how to fold shirts neatly, the right way to match socks, and how to handle delicate fabrics. He laughed a few times, struggling to make the folds even, and she laughed with him. "You make it look easy," he said. "Everything looks easy when you've done it long enough," she replied. "But it's not magic. It's just patience," he smiled. "Patience, huh? That's one thing I'm still learning." "You will," she said gently. "It just takes time." Over time, they developed a quiet friendship, one built not on status or age but on mutual respect. He listened when she spoke, and she encouraged him without ever lecturing. She never once made him feel small for his past mistakes. Instead, she treated him like someone capable of growth. That was what made all the difference. At school, his teachers continued to notice the change. He wasn't the top student, but he asked questions, turned in homework, and even stayed after class to help organize group projects. Some classmates who used to tease him for being lazy now respected him. One day, a teacher asked him to help a younger student who was struggling in math. He agreed, though he wasn't confident. But as he sat with the student after class explaining what little he understood, something clicked. He realized he actually enjoyed helping someone else learn. That night when he got home, he told the maid about it while she prepared dinner. "I helped someone today," he said proudly. "A kid who was failing math," she smiled. "And how did it feel?" He shrugged, trying not to sound too excited. "Good. Better than I thought it would." "That's because teaching is the best way to learn," she said. "When you help others, you understand things differently." He nodded, realizing she was right again. She always was. Days turned into weeks, and he found himself growing more disciplined. He made a small schedule for himself. Study in the morning, rest in the afternoon, and help the maid with small chores in the evening. It wasn't perfect, but it gave his life balance. One weekend, his father returned from a long business trip. The moment he stepped into the house, he noticed the difference in the cleaner study area, the open books, and his son, sitting at the table reading. His father stood there quietly for a moment before saying, "You've changed." The boy looked up and smiled faintly. Trying to. For a moment, his father didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and said, "That's all I ever wanted." That simple sentence meant more to him than any expensive gift could have. The maid saw the change too. The boy spoke with more kindness to the staff, thanked the driver when dropped off, and even helped the gardener one morning by watering the plants. She never told him she was proud, as she didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes. One afternoon, while he was studying, he heard her talking on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was soft but tired. She was speaking to someone about her daughter's school fees. The words were quiet, but he could tell she was worried. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. She had done so much for him without expecting anything. Now she was struggling with something she couldn't easily fix. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. The next day, he asked his father casually if the company ever offered scholarships for employees' children. His father raised an eyebrow. "Why do you ask?" "I just think people who work hard should have a chance to give their kids a better life," he said carefully. His father looked at him thoughtfully and said, "That's a good thought. Maybe we should." A week later, the company announced a small education fund for workers' families. The boy didn't say a word, but he felt quietly happy knowing the maid's daughter would benefit. When she found out, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to say," she told him softly. He smiled. "You don't have to say anything. You've done more for me than you know." She looked at him with warmth and pride. "You've come a long way," she said. He shrugged, embarrassed. "Still learning?" "Good," she said. "Never stop." Months passed, and the bond between them grew even stronger. The mansion, once cold and silent, now felt alive, filled with quiet laughter, conversations, and shared moments of respect. One rainy evening, as thunder rumbled in the distance, the electricity flickered and went out. The house went dark. The boy grabbed a flashlight and made his way to the kitchen, where he found the maid lighting candles. "Feels strange without all the lights," he said. She smiled, setting a candle on the table. "Sometimes darkness helps us see what really matters." They sat there for a while, talking about life, about her childhood, about his dreams, and about how people often forget the value of simplicity. She told him stories of her younger days, how she had struggled to find work and raise her children alone, how she never lost hope. Listening to her, he realized she wasn't just strong, she was wise. She had faced things far harder than failed exams or disappointment, and yet, she stood tall every single day. When the lights finally came back on, he looked around the room, seeing everything differently. The house no longer felt like a symbol of wealth. It felt like a place of lessons, a place where he was learning what really mattered. That night, before sleeping, he opened his journal, something he'd started keeping recently, and wrote, Some teachers don't stand in classrooms. Some teach by living right in front of you. As he put down the pen, he smiled quietly. He didn't know what the future would bring. More tests, more failures, maybe even more challenges. But he wasn't afraid anymore. Because now he understood that learning wasn't about passing exams. It was about growing stronger, kinder, and wiser every single day. And thanks to the maid's lessons, he was finally learning how to stand tall, on his own. The mansion had changed, and so had he. The boy, once careless and indifferent, now carried a quiet confidence. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was there, a steady feeling that he could face challenges no matter how small or large. Each day he pushed himself to do better, not just in school, but in how he treated the people around him. It was a bright Saturday morning when his father returned unexpectedly from a business trip. The boy was in the kitchen, helping the maid prepare breakfast. He was chopping vegetables with care, focusing on even cuts and humming softly to himself. The maid noticed him and smiled. "You've come a long way," she said quietly. He shrugged, trying to hide the pride in his smile. "I'm learning." Before she could answer, the front door opened and his father stepped in. His eyes scanned the room, then narrowed slightly when he saw his son at the counter. "You're in the kitchen?" he asked, not sounding angry, just surprised. The boy looked up. "Yes, sir. I thought I could help." His father's gaze softened. He noticed the organized counter, the neatly chopped vegetables, and the calm in his son's movements. "I see you've changed," he said. "This effort, it's not something I expected." The boy felt a warmth spread inside him. For years, his father had only seen failure, laziness, and excuses. Now, for the first time, he was seeing respect and recognition. "That's because someone taught me," he said quietly, nodding toward the maid. The maid blushed slightly but said nothing. She simply went back to her work, letting the moment belong to him. Later that day, the boy's father asked him to sit down. "I received a call from your teacher," he said. "They told me you've been helping a younger student with math. Is that true?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir. I realize teaching someone else helps me understand better, too." His father leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. "I never thought I'd see this in you. I'm proud, son, not because of grades, but because you're learning responsibility." It was a small moment, but it felt huge. He had never heard those words before. His father had always been busy, always focused on work, always expecting results. Now, for the first time, he felt seen. The weeks that followed were different. He studied harder, not obsessively, but with focus. He took responsibility for his chores, helping the maid without being asked. He began noticing things others took for granted: the quiet work of the gardener, the patience of the driver, the care of the cook. He learned to thank them, to appreciate them, to understand that effort mattered even when it went unnoticed. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, he noticed the maid sitting on a bench reading a small notebook. He sat beside her. "What are you writing?" he asked. She looked up and smiled. "Just notes. Memories, thoughts, reminders of things that matter." "Can I see?" he asked hesitantly. She handed him the notebook. Inside were simple entries, lessons from life, stories about her children, reflections on work and kindness. He read carefully, realizing how much wisdom she carried in simple words. "You've lived a full life," he said softly. She nodded. "Not perfect, not easy, but full. Everyone can learn from what they live through if they pay attention." He thought about his own life. Years of ignoring opportunities, of taking wealth for granted, of failing without trying. He felt a pang of regret, but also determination. He didn't want to waste any more time. That evening, his father called him into the study. "I have something to discuss with you," he said. "I want to take you to a business meeting next week. It's not just about money or work. I want you to see how decisions are made, how responsibilities are handled." The boy's heart raced. This was new territory, and for a moment fear and excitement mixed together. But he remembered the lessons from the maid: patience, effort, focus. He nodded. "I'll go, sir." At the meeting, he watched carefully. His father discussed deals, budgets, and strategies. He saw the pressure, the decisions, and the consequences. He realized that success wasn't about luck or inheritance. It was about knowledge, effort, and integrity. The things the maid had been teaching him in small, quiet ways suddenly made sense in a bigger world. When they returned home, he found the maid waiting in the kitchen. "How was the trip?" she asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on his face. "It was eye-opening," he said. "I understand now. Everything you taught me, patience, responsibility, focus, it matters in every part of life." She smiled. "I'm glad you see it. Life is full of lessons, most of which aren't in books." He nodded. "You were right. Effort counts more than comfort." Over the next few weeks, his grades continued to improve. Teachers noticed consistency and effort. Classmates began seeking his help. He felt more confident, not arrogant, but steady in his abilities. He no longer feared failure because he understood it was part of learning. One day, he received a message from his father. "I want to introduce you to a charity project we support. It involves helping children who don't have access to good education." He felt a rush of emotion. He thought of the maid's daughter, of other children he had met who struggled with school, and of how much effort could change a life. "I'd like to go," he replied. At the project, he met children who were curious, eager to learn, but lacked resources. He helped them with reading and math, sharing small tips he had learned himself. He realized teaching them wasn't just helping them. It helped him understand empathy, patience, and leadership. Later that evening, he told the maid about the experience. "I didn't know helping others could feel this." "Good," he said. She smiled warmly. "It's the best feeling. Giving effort to someone else teaches you more than giving it to yourself." Months passed, and his father noticed the steady change. The boy was no longer a troublemaker or a failure. He was responsible, thoughtful, and focused. One evening, his father called him into the study. "Son, I've been watching you grow," he said quietly. "You've changed more than I imagined. I'm proud, truly proud." The boy felt tears well up, but he blinked them back. "Thank you, sir," he said softly. His father leaned back, then added, "But the real credit goes to her." He nodded toward the maid, who was quietly cleaning in the corner. "She saw what I couldn't, what I had little time to notice. She helped you in ways no tutor or teacher could." The boy turned to the maid, who looked at him with gentle eyes. For a moment, words weren't enough. He simply nodded, and she smiled in return. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Some teachers don't stand in classrooms. Some teach by showing how to live." He realized how much he had learned, not just about studies or discipline, but about life itself. Effort, patience, empathy, and responsibility were lessons he would carry forever, and he knew that none of it would have been possible without her quiet guidance. Weeks later, he saw a flyer for a local school in need of volunteers. He decided to spend part of his weekend helping children there, teaching reading and math, sharing the lessons he had learned. He thought of the maid, of how she had taught him without asking for anything in return, and how her small acts of guidance had changed his life. At the school, he worked alongside other volunteers. Children listened carefully as he explained problems, repeated instructions, and encouraged them when they made mistakes. He realized that teaching wasn't just about sharing knowledge. It was about showing patience, care, and belief in someone else's potential. When he returned home that evening, he found the maid waiting with dinner ready. "How was your day?" she asked. "It was amazing," he said, smiling. "I never knew teaching could be so meaningful," she nodded knowingly. "You're learning life, not just lessons from books. That's what matters most." The boy sat quietly, thinking about how far he had come. He remembered the days when he had failed every test, when he felt invisible and unmotivated, when he believed money could solve everything. Now he understood that effort, humility, and kindness were worth far more than wealth. And as he looked at the maid, he realized something else, that the lessons she taught him weren't just about success. They were about being human. For the first time, he felt ready to face whatever challenges life would bring. Not because he had money, not because he had tutors, not because he had a father who cared, but because he had learned how to stand on his own, guided by the quiet wisdom of someone who had believed in him when no one else had. And in that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. The years passed quietly, but they carried immense change. The boy, who had once failed every test and wandered through life without purpose, was no longer that person. He had grown, slowly but surely, learning patience, effort, and responsibility in ways money could never teach. He still lived in the mansion, but it no longer felt like a prison of wealth and expectation. It had become a place of learning, of small victories, and of quiet friendships. He had finished school with passing grades, And while he wasn't the top student, he had learned far more than academics could ever provide. He knew what it meant to try, to fail, and to try again. He knew how it felt to help someone without expecting recognition. He had learned humility and empathy, and for the first time he felt confident in his own abilities. One afternoon, his father invited him into the study. "I've been thinking," his father said, sitting in his leather chair. "It's time for you to take on a larger responsibility. Not because of money, but because of what you've learned about effort and leadership." The boy listened carefully as his father spoke about plans to expand their family's charitable foundation. "I want you to lead a project," his father continued. "I want you to make decisions, face challenges, and help others the way you've learned to help yourself." The boy felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He thought of the maid, who had taught him the first lesson about effort, responsibility, and believing in oneself. He thought of the younger students he had tutored and the children at the volunteer school. Now he had a chance to make a difference on a larger scale. "I'll do it," he said quietly but firmly. His father smiled. "I know you will." The project was challenging. It required meetings, planning, and working with people from different backgrounds. He faced obstacles: budgets that didn't balance, volunteers who didn't show up, and children with needs far beyond what he had expected. At first it was overwhelming. He wanted to quit, just as he had wanted to quit when he failed his first exams. But he remembered the maid's words. "Failing isn't the problem. Staying down is." He breathed deeply and kept going. Step by step, problem by problem, he learned to manage, to plan, and to persevere. Slowly, the project began to take shape. Children who had struggled with reading could now read short stories. Math scores were improving. Volunteers started showing up regularly because they felt inspired by his effort and dedication. One afternoon, as he was organizing books for the children, he noticed the maid standing at the doorway quietly watching him. She had come to visit, and when he saw her, he ran over. "You came," he said, smiling. "I did," she replied softly. "I wanted to see how my student is doing." He laughed. "I've come a long way thanks to you." She smiled but shook her head. "You did it yourself. I only reminded you of what you were capable of." "I don't think I would have realized it without you," he said sincerely. "You taught me how to stand, how to try, and how to care. I'll never forget that." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to see that you can grow even when it seems impossible." The boy nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He realized that this moment was more important than any achievement. The maid had not only taught him lessons for school, but lessons for life. She had taught him resilience, kindness, humility, and courage, lessons he would carry forever. The following months were filled with progress and small victories. The Foundation's project continued to grow. Children who had once struggled to read were now confident. Their families began noticing changes in their attitudes. The boy felt proud, but it wasn't pride in himself. It was pride in the difference he was making in others' lives. One evening, the Foundation organized a small ceremony to honor the volunteers and children. The boy's father invited the maid as a guest of honor, and when she arrived, the children rushed to greet her, hugging her warmly. She smiled, a mixture of humility and joy on her face. The boy stepped up to speak. He felt nervous, but he knew he had something important to say. "I want to thank everyone here for their hard work," he began. "But I also want to thank someone who changed my life when I didn't know how to change it myself." He turned to the maid. "You didn't just teach me lessons from books or tests. You taught me lessons of life, lessons I would never forget. You showed me what it means to work hard, to care for others, and to keep going even when I..." Years later, he became known not only as the son of a billionaire, but as someone who made a real difference. He continued to work with the Foundation, expanding it to help more children, especially those whose families worked in humble jobs. He ensured that the children received education, resources, and encouragement. Exactly the things the maid had taught him mattered most, and through it all, he never forgot her. He invited her to events, consulted her advice, and ensured that she and her family were well taken care of. He had learned that gratitude wasn't just words, it was action. One afternoon, many years after the first day she arrived, he visited her small home. She had grown older, but her eyes were the same, warm, strong, and wise. He brought her a gift, a simple token of appreciation, and sat with her over tea. "You changed my life," he said quietly. "I don't know how to ever thank you enough." She smiled, shaking her head. "You've changed your own life. I only reminded you of what you could do." He looked at her, remembering the days of failing tests, of feeling hopeless, of wandering through life without direction. "You reminded me of what it means to try, to care, and to stand. That's a lesson I'll carry forever." "And that's all I ever wanted," she said. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea and enjoying the quiet peace. Outside, children played in the yard, laughing and running, full of energy and hope. The boy, now a grown man, watched them and realized that life had come full circle. The lessons he had learned from her were not just for himself. They were being passed on quietly through every child he helped. He smiled, knowing that one small act, her decision to care, to teach, to guide, had created ripples that changed countless lives. And he knew that the greatest lesson of all wasn't about wealth, success, or status. It was about effort, kindness, humility, and believing in someone when no one else does. The boy who had failed every test was gone. In his place was a man who stood tall, not because of money, but because he had learned how to grow, how to care, and how to make a difference. And every time he faced a challenge, he remembered her words, her patience, and her quiet wisdom. In the end, the lesson he had learned from the new maid, the lesson he would never forget, was simple yet powerful. Effort, kindness, and belief in oneself can change a life, and sometimes that life is your own. He carried that lesson with him forever, quietly passing it on to others, ensuring that the gift he had been given would continue to grow, touching lives in ways he had once only dreamed of. And in that quiet truth, he finally understood what it meant to truly stand. Not because someone forced him to, but because someone believed in him, and he had finally believed in himself.